Hello and welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. And today we have a little interview. Today I'm sitting here with Andy Watts. You are the founder distiller of the Bains whiskey from the James Sedgwick Distillery of South Africa. You have been 35 years within the business and 29 years of that within the whiskey producing business. So a lot of experience. Thank you very much for coming here.
No, it's a real pleasure, and thank you for inviting me, Benedict.
Yeah, it's a lovely whiskey, and you are from the Bains distillery. So I've not heard that much yet. I've heard some stuff like your prizes, but how did you become a whiskey distillery in South Africa? How did Bains?
Sure. Well,
arise?
my journey was not the normal route to being a master distiller, founder distiller. I mean, I grew up in England in the early 60s, and like most young kids in those days, I wanted to be a professional footballer. That was my dream. And, school was a reason to try to become a footballer. And when I got into the later end of my school career, I realized I wasn't going to become a professional footballer, so I became a professional cricketer. And I played cricket for Derbyshire in the UK, and obviously cricket being just a summer game, I had to try and find somewhere to escape from the cold English winters. And my teammate Peter Kirsten, a very famous South African cricketer back then, he came up with the idea of, why don't I come to South Africa for a winter? So 3 weeks later I was in this very strange country, didn't know too much about it, and I was playing cricket. And whilst I was playing cricket, I got involved with a company called Stellenbosch Farmers Winery, doing a little bit of part-time work for them, and they were a liquor industry company. And for 3 years I did 6 months South Africa, 6 months the UK playing cricket, and then they offered me a job full-time to come and work in their spirit blending cellar in 1984, October 1984. So I finished that cricket season, and then I came back to UK just to tell my parents that I was emigrating to South Africa. And then things really started to get interesting, because I was back now working in South Africa, and we were at that stage, I was in the blending cellar, so it was brandy, it was whiskey, it was vodkas, gins, and we were doing bulk whiskey business with a company called Morrison Bowmore Distillers. And they came across each year, their directors and senior management, to have their annual meeting with the Stellenbosch Farmers management team. And I got invited to the braai, the barbecue, one evening. And I still think, I don't know why, I think it was because I was probably the only one who could understand who the Scots spoke, and I could actually kind of be the interpreter for the evening. But as the evening went on and it became very jovial, a gentleman called Alistair Ross came up to me and he says, we quite like the idea of maybe, would you like to come back to Scotland and learn how to make whiskey? Which I thought was like a great idea, being young and eager and enjoying travel, and which was really ironic because I'd grown up in England, which was where I stayed 100 miles from the Scottish border, but I'd never been to Scotland. So I'm now being sent back from South Africa to Scotland to learn how to make whiskey. And for the next 4 years, between 1985 and 1989, I spent various periods of each year back in Scotland with Morrison Bowmore at the Glengarry distillery up in Old Meldrum, close to Aberdeen, and then in Auchentoshan, just outside of Glasgow, their Lowland distillery. And then obviously I spent time on the iconic island of Islay, actually at that stage working under Jim McEwen, who's a very good friend of mine still. He was manager at Bowmore at that stage. But while I was there, I kind of fell in love with the island, the people, and especially the whiskies. I enjoy personally smoking.
So did you stay in the town of Bowmore?
Oh yeah, I had a little caravan in the back of the distillery, which they put me up in there. Yeah, no, it was good fun. It really was, and I think what was amazing then, when I first made that first trip, I still didn't believe this was going to be the industry for me. But spending those periods of time with very generous people like Brian Morrison, David Gressick, Alistair Ross, Stuart Ogkinson, Jim McEwen, people who were prepared to share their knowledge. The industry was slightly different then. And, you know, when in 1989 Brian Morrison sold Morrison's to Suntory and my trips to Scotland stopped and I permanently was back in South Africa, and the company's mandate to me then was, you know, listen, you have now got to improve the quality of our whiskey in South Africa and the quantity of whiskey which we produce. Quite a challenge, but I was pretty much the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. Nobody else was making whiskey in South Africa at that time. I didn't have a distillery in every town, so it was not easy to phone a friend if something went wrong. But, you know, I came back with a really strong, passionate attitude that, you know, even though the Scots are absolutely fantastic at what they do, they don't have the sole prerogative to produce good whiskey. And I think that's shown even more in the last few years when more and more New World whiskies have started to come to the fore. So I came back with that attitude of having the utmost respect for an industry which was over 500 years old, but our industry in South Africa at that stage was, you know, 22 years old. Or sorry, not even that. It was 18 years old. And so, you know, there was no ways tradition was going to hold me back. I pretty much, you know, had carte blanche. Nobody was expecting a certain style, or so I kind of worked along the guidelines. Our legislation in South Africa is pretty much the same as what it is in Scotland. But within that legislation, we can be quite innovative, and that is the way we do things. So that was my route into the career, and here I am now, you know, in my 35th year in the industry, and still living every moment of it.
So how did you cope with the, let's say, the climate? Because
it was a challenge, because you come back after learning how to make whiskey in a cool climate or a cold climate, and you come to South Africa and you just, for example, pitch your fermentations at a certain temperature. You know, you just throw the yeast in, and all of a sudden you're at 40 degrees, which is not good for yeast. So I had to, you know, I quickly learned that you cannot distill a good spirit from a bad fermentation. So we set about, you know, working with our yeast suppliers, creating specific strains for our conditions, and then also making sure that the yeast was able to operate in its optimum temperature zones, which we did by starting to control and cool our fermentations once they started to reach a certain temperature.
So how can I expect you're at the side of Kapstadt, right?
Yeah, we're about 45 minutes outside of Cape Town in the winelands. Summer temperatures averaging probably between 35 and 40 degrees centigrade, and then in the winter we get cool evenings. We don't get snow. Maybe a touch of ground frost, but if we get that at night, then we've got a high pressure system, which means our daytime temperatures are also mid-20s to 30 even in winter.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Interesting.
So we are supposed to get winter rainfall in Cape Town. It is becoming less and less. But even when it rains, it's you know, you would class it probably as warm rain.
Yeah, it's still Africa, right?
Yeah.
So and how do you come with the name Bains, or has it always been called Bains?
No. Actually, the concept of Bains I came up with in 1999. You know, if you look at South Africa's history over the last 25, 30 years, things have changed quite a lot. And in 1994, when we had our first democratic elections, you know, post 94, whiskey started to return to South Africa, which had boycotted the country due to sanctions in the apartheid days. And also it created a totally new whiskey consumer. And I was looking at the products which came back, which became popular, two of them especially, one from Ireland and one from the States, and both of them began with the letter J. So I think you can work out for yourself what those two whiskies were. And I kind of looked at those two whiskies and I thought, okay, what makes them so special? Why are they so big, apart from the massive advertising budgets? But what makes them so popular amongst the South African whiskey drinker? And, you know, I kind of looked at the Irish whiskies and said, you know, incredibly soft, they're smooth, easy to drink, but on their own, you know, maybe a little bit bland. not so much the case now, as more and more Irish whiskies come on the market, and more variations in the style, and I think that's a trend which is going on throughout the world. But at that stage, I was looking at something soft, smooth, very easy to drink. On the other hand, I was looking at the whiskey from the States, and I'm seeing lots of spice, lots of sweetness, vanilla notes, toffee notes. But I'm also getting an oiliness. Bourbon isn't a drink you're just going to enjoy straight, neat from the first glass. It's almost an acquired taste, like an Ireland peated whiskey for me. And so what I was doing, I was thinking, okay, soft, smooth, easy drinking, sweet, spicy, toffee notes, vanilla. How can I get the best of both worlds? And that was when I actually thought that, let me look at using grain spirit. Now, in 1999, grain was not fashionable. Grain was for blends. And that was the case in South Africa too. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use a grain spirit. So we distilled a very nice grain spirit, which we do. And I decided to go to the States and bring back first fill ex-bourbon casks, a cask which has just been used once for bourbon. Put that Newmake Spirit into that cask and leave it for the minimum period of 3 years, which is our legislation for making whiskey. And after that 3 years, I was going to have my eureka moment. This whiskey I dreamt about was going to be there. And so the 3 years went by, and I looked at it, and it wasn't that eureka moment. It wasn't as different as I wanted it to be. So I took the really unusual step of going back to the States and buying a second set of first fill ex-bourbon barrels and putting that whiskey then into those casks for a further 2 years. Now, we didn't know it was going to be 2 years. We started off monitoring every 3 years how the product was developing. And, after 2 years, we said the product's right. And the reason I came about that was that if you look at maturation, each year in maturation, you lose a little bit more extraction. Okay, so I'd gone 1, 2, 3. I was expecting eureka. I didn't get it. To leave it in that same cask would have not got me more of the flavors I was wanting, because you're getting less extraction from the cask. So that's why I went 1, 2, 3, new set of casks, 1, 2. So I was actually giving first the spirit and then the whiskey twice the opportunity to extract from the first fill ex-bourbon cask these spicy, sweet, toffee, vanilla notes, to give it a nice little sweetness on top of what is an exceptionally smooth, soft grain spirit. And that was how it came about. What also helps us, of course, is our climate again in South Africa being quite warm. We are losing between 4 and 5% per year to the Angel share.
I would expect if you told me, okay, double maturation, kind of, and plus your climate, is it? I would say you pretty much come out with an intense one.
What we found is the whiskey portrays itself as being much more mature, much smoother, much softer than what people would expect in what is generally a 5-year-old product. And that was the case the whole way with Bains for me. It wasn't necessarily about creating, like most whiskies were at that stage, with a bold age statement on them. It was about showing that the style of whiskey can just be as important as a number which is on the bottle. And I think Bains kind of shows that, the way that the style of a whiskey can almost say, I don't even want to look at the label, I just enjoy the whiskey.
So was that the reason, like the climate or the individualism, like no one else is doing whiskey for South Africa? Or why did you go to South Africa? Or why was Bains founded?
South Africa started making whiskey in 1977. The company I work with started making whiskey in 1977. And it was more at that stage on an experimental stage, and I think it was all triggered by this move to Scotland, this let's say apprenticeship which I served with Morrison's over those few years, that kind of gave the company the confidence to say, okay, let's try and take our whiskey to the next step. Whiskey is still a very, very small part of our mother company's business, but it's I will be eternally grateful. I mean, everything I've tried, everything I've failed at, everything I've succeeded with, they've always given me their full support. And when I've come up with these ideas, And when I've asked for, please can I get a second set of new casks for a particular product, which is not normal, the company didn't turn around to me and say no, you can't. They actually believed in the vision which I had, and now, as I say, I'll be forever grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. So, is there anything else, or is that the one that makes Bain single grain stand out from other single grains? What's?
Well, I think it is. I think the fact that we can honestly say that we looked at grain as a category on its own before the rest of the world were really doing that. I mean, commercial grains out of Scotland were not really on the market. You might get a rare release from Cameron Bridge, or you might have been fortunate enough to try, a absolutely marvelous grain from North British. But these weren't generally available on the shelves.
Yeah.
So, in 2009, 10 years after I came up with the idea, when we launched Bains Cape Mountain Whisky, it was still almost a forerunner of grain whisky throughout the world. There weren't too many grain whiskies which were actually marketed as grain whiskies. The fact it was in South Africa, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not held back by tradition. So I was making a range of 3 Ships whiskies which are based on, let's say, a traditional style of whiskey. Malts, blends, different cask finishes. The fact that I decided to go on a complete different tangent with something like Bains, nobody was looking at me and saying, but why are you doing that? It was almost as though, wow, this is something new. And really, Bains was what helped put South Africa on the map even before it won its first awards, because through the innovation behind Bains and the fact that this little country called South Africa, not really known for whiskey, being innovative with this product, got us the Global Icon Whiskey Innovator of the Year award in 2011 from the Whisky magazine and the World Whisky Awards in London. So that was what really put South African whiskey as a little blip on the world radar.
I think what you just shown is that you put a lot of thought into a grain whiskey. Usually when you mentioned it, there are some gems, but usually when you have a grain whiskey, it's just mass produced, just throw it on the market, anything. So you've put in a lot of thought about it. Is it comparable to a single malt then? Because if you look at a single malt, they're putting a bit more thought into the single malt as well. How do you see that?
Well, obviously there's a big difference. I mean, single grain and single malt. The single refers to a particular distillery, but malt whiskey must be made from malted barley. It must be distilled in pot stills. Grain whiskey, for example, can be made from any other grain. We choose South African yellow maize. It's in abundance in South Africa. And grain whiskey is generally column distilled. So, by taking it to a higher ABV on the column, you are taking a lot more of the congeners out, which remain in a malt whiskey. And that is given us then, the lighter style spirit, which enables the wood then to play that, predominant role in creating this amazing liquid.
So you've mentioned that you got the Innovators Award in London.
In 2011. Yeah.
Is it? I always thought that these prize festivals or prize events are like, I don't know, a closed group, and it's like, oh, South Africa, you don't even have to come. Is it? Did you get successful with that?
Well, we weren't at the event. Let's put it that way.
Oh, okay.
we had no idea. It came as a complete surprise for us back then, and I think it also, to be recognised by your peers in the industry is. It's very humbling, and it is actually, you feel pretty good because anybody can win a lotto, but for somebody to say to you, listen, we quite think that at this stage you're doing as much as certain other countries in the world are doing. I think that kind of gave us that inspiration almost to say, wow, if we can achieve this, what can we do going forward? And that's pretty much our whole. Or my whole philosophy has been that even though I have a core range of whiskies across certain brands, innovation is still very much at the forefront. It's what drives what we do at the distillery.
Hmm. Interesting, interesting. So when you say innovation, I've only known the Bains yet.
Yeah.
Is there anything coming up if you're talking about the innovation?
Well, on the Bains side, which is the grain, I was ready to launch Bains in 2006, 2007. We only launched in 2009. There was various things happening in the company at that time, so I didn't lose faith. So the whiskies which I was ready to launch, I thought, okay, what can I do with those whiskies? So I kind of put those back into different casks. For example, we have just launched now a very limited amount into global travel retail of a 15-year-old Bains, which is the Bains as we see it here.
Oh, okay.
Which just went back into older American oak for a further 10-year period. And all it's done, again with our climate helping in the maturation and it being accelerated, all it's done is it's really softened everything down which is in this particular product into being such a more smooth, velvety, and then such a real subtle mouth.
Really getting into it.
No, it's. I think it is one of those whiskies which, when you do try it, you can kind of understand where we're coming from to try and get to where we are. And you asked about the name as well. Where did the name come from? The name comes after a gentleman called Andrew Geddes Bain. He was a stowaway a young stowaway on a ship to South Africa in the early 1800s from Scotland, and he made himself a pass builder. Pretty much like my vocation was not in the beginning to become a whiskey maker, and he built 42 passes, a lot of them with his son as he got older, but his most famous pass is the Bains Kloof Pass, which actually is in the village of Wellington where the James Sedgwick distillery is. And that pass was the first road which connected the Cape with the inland of South Africa. So in other words, he built this pass over these mountains, a 28-kilometer pass, in 1849 to 1853. So we see Andrew Geddes Bain as being this pioneering pass builder. We see ourselves as being pioneering whiskey makers. So we thought the synergy of the two, with him being such a famous figurehead in our town, would actually be a fitting, like, let's say, a recognition of what this gentleman did and what we are trying to do.
Yeah, I didn't know that South Africa had so many mountains, but I was there back in 2012, but not your region. Horst was there. He was actually supposed to be here today, but he was incapable of being here. But he said, very beautiful country, but are there penguins in your region?
Well, they are in the Cape, yeah. We're 45 minutes from Cape Town.
Ah, okay.
So, you've got this very famous place in Cape Town called Boulders Beach.
Okay.
Where the penguins come in every day, and, people flock there to see the penguins come and go. So
nice. So you are in the tourist region, if you say.
Well, we're actually,
region?
it's probably the last place you would expect to find a whiskey distillery. The distillery itself was founded in 1886 by James Sedgwick.
1886?
Yeah. Which is,
quite a time.
In European history, it's not a long time ago. In South African history, it's quite a while. But in 1886, he founded the distillery, and predominantly right up until when I got sent to the distillery in late 1989, 1990, it had always been a brandy distillery because we're in the winemaking region of South Africa, and brandy used to be the national spirit of South Africa. It's still an incredible product. But whiskey has overtaken it now in terms of volume, by 25% at least.
Yeah, I had a few brandy. It just doesn't compare to the quality of a good whiskey.
Yeah, I think it's
if you have a whiskey, it's just if you get a bit more into the business, you are deeper into the business than I am. With the fermentation and the maturation and the distillation, you have so many dials you can twist, and until you have the product you want to have inside the bottle, and usually probably you are as well. You have so many. You have a good product. I've never tried a whiskey that I would say I don't like it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, listen, whiskey is very subjective. We all know that.
I've had a few ingredients of whiskey where you say, okay, this is our part for this kind of blend. It's like, oh, okay, that's a bit too heavy for me or something like that. But usually when you have a blend behind that, a blend or a vetting in a distillery, I don't know how you call it, usually you come up with such a nice complexity and a balanced whiskey. So, but you've prepared something for me.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of what I call a deconstruction. It's
okay.
Most of us, when we see whiskey, we see it in its final form. And I thought I'd just show you today, the whole idea of my thought pattern of how I actually got into this. So the first whiskey we have on the left is actually not a whiskey. This is Newmake Spirit.
Okay.
And this is South African grain spirit. These have been broken down to 40% ABV. Normally when we do a tasting, I would suggest just a dash of water to open up the flavors. When you drink whiskey how you enjoy it. But with this one, even at 40%, you'll find it's got a very...
Okay, 40%, yeah.
Yeah, it's got a very nice nose on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a florally sweet, almost a little bit of aniseed, licorice notes coming through there.
It's incredibly fresh.
Yeah.
Usually you do have a lot of pears, but this one is a bit more flowery, or anise, a bit of that anise note, or what is it?
Yeah,
anise, peppermint, something a bit more of these etheric oils, and anise, definitely anise, in that direction. Oh, that's...
If you take a little sip of this, and I mean, a lot of people are quite wary when you say, listen, this is Newmake Spirit. A lot of people are quite wary because it can be...
Newmake Spirit is a good way of telling where you come from, but I just wouldn't pour it in the evening when I just want to relax. It's just not that pleasant.
Well, let's have a little taste of this one and see if we get into the pleasant category.
It's rounder than I expected.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a 40% one. Usually when you have Newmake, it's like, whoa, 50, it burns.
No, these have been broken down.
Just sure. We're all on the same it's very, I would say it's a light one.
Yeah, which is what I was looking for.
It's a light one with also a few flower notes, I would say, but not as with the anise touch. I would really go a hint of lemon or lime with... Strange to... let me have another one. Can't quite pinpoint it, but some type of flowers, I would say.
But you
and
find
a little bit of a sweetness in there.
Yeah.
A hint of sweetness, a little bit of a wild honey note or something like that in that direction. So it's a light, sweet honey. So you said single grain from
South African yellow maize.
Yellow maize.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay. So to be honest,
It's very pleasant. I would have expected a Newmake that is just more of like a window cleaner type.
Yeah. No, and I think that is one of the things right from the beginning when you mentioned malts, grains. I've never given any less attention to grain than I've given to my premium single malts, which I make for the Three Ships range. I've always used the analogy, when people were just using grains for blends, I use the analogy of an artist, that he or she needs a good canvas, and with a good canvas, with the different colours, then they can paint you a beautiful, clear, sunny day like it is today, or a dark, stormy evening if you've got a cold front coming in. But the secret ingredient is the canvas. Otherwise, that masterpiece is not going to become a masterpiece in 100 years or 200 years of time. So the same with whiskey for me and blending, especially the blending, because your canvas in blending is the grain. And if you take a typical blend of being 75% grain, 25% malt, then if the grain is not good, you're not going to create a masterpiece of a blend. So even though our grains were going into our blends, we still wanted to take a lot of time and attention to make sure that our grains were that perfect canvas for making the blend. So to take it on its own, to start saying, okay, can I create a single grain whiskey using that as a base? I think you can see from that it isn't actually a bad base to start from.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
So if we look at glass number 2, we have basically now taken glass number 1
Mm-hmm.
and we've just aged him now for 3 years in older American oak. So I'm talking 3rd, 4th, 5th fill casks. Okay?
Mm-hmm. But this was not the one where you wanted to find the eureka moment.
No, we're
this
gonna
is
get
just
to that.
a different. Okay.
This is just. But I'm showing you what the influence of wood can do on
Mm-hmm.
on this original glass 1.
Mm-hmm.
So this is glass 1, which has been matured in older American oak for 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's definitely, you definitely have more of a forward flavor with a bit more sweetness in it in the
Mhm.
nose.
You pick up a little bit of oakiness there as well.
Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm. It became heavier, I would say, with oakiness in there.
Mhm.
Also, a bit more fruity flavors that are
Mhm.
kind of different. I would say a little bit of apple and a little bit of lemon in there as well. I would have expected more sweetness, but you said 5, 5th, yeah.
3rd, 4th, 5th fill.
Mm-hmm.
And so
But the oak comes through.
comes through.
Very interesting that so it's from the same. This stuff
This-
just 3 years in
Just
the
3
cask.
years in the
Okay.
cask, okay? But this now, if you move on to the next one, number 3, is
Mhm.
again whiskey number 1, which is being put into first fill ex bourbon for a 3-year period of time.
So this one is your eureka
So this
moment.
was going to be my eureka moment.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's have a look. So after you did your order with the big bulk of barrels, was like after 3 years.
This is going to be it.
But you tried them in between,
Well,
right?
you tried in between, yeah.
Sure, it's
yeah,
not
right.
like you come after 3 years. Come on, that's
No. We still produced the 2nd year. We still produced the 3rd year while it was maturing.
Okay.
But
nice.
you know, the end goal was going to be after 3 years we're going to have the product we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on the nose you can start to pick up a little bit more of the vanilla coming through now on this one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more intense, more of a
Yeah.
bit of a bit that wood flavor, that little bit of caramel coming through. The sweetness is a bit more,
Sweetness.
but it's a forward one, I would say. You have that sweetness.
A little bit
You
of
still-
tropical fruit in
You
there
still
too,
feel
maybe.
a bit of that flowery note in
Yeah.
there, like from your canvas, with tropical fruit note. You say.
Yeah, I pick up a little bit of maybe, pineapple, banana.
Yeah, fresh.
Mm.
It's not one of these old pineapples
Mm.
that are really really ripe, but there's a bit of a fresh fruity
Fresh
note,
fruity,
tropical
yeah.
fruity note going on.
I think the big difference comes on the taste. Now all of a sudden you've got some spiciness coming through there. You've got that toffee, vanillas becoming more
Mhm.
prominent, especially as the saliva just breaks down the spirit and it releases it into the back of the throat.
Mm. In the flavor, in the aroma, or in the taste, they're a bit more ripe. I would say, yeah, ripe, pineapple, yeah. For me, it reminds me a bit of banana, a little bit,
Yeah, that's
with a good amount of sweetness, and still, when you have it in your mouth for a few seconds, you do realize, okay, now there's a good amount of oak in there.
Yeah.
So it's really feeling like a good whiskey, and that feeling of whiskey when you have that oak flavor that is just associated with it.
And that was where my eureka moment became a
Mhm.
nice moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really want nice.
Mm.
I wanted something a bit more. But I think if we look at these first 3 samples, what we've
Nice
got
is a good description for that one.
No, my wife's cooking's nice. I was looking for a restaurant nice.
Okay.
So what we've got.
But it's holding.
It is. But you're now going to see the secret of what I did to come to what we ultimately have in the end. So what you've got here is you've got the first grain, Newmake. This would be typical of what we would put into our blends. Okay, older American oak, we're not looking for those vanilla, spicy, tropical notes, fruit. We're not looking for too much of that here. The whole role of the grain for me in the blend is to soften the complexity of the malts. So that was always going to be a blending one, but I wanted something different. That's why I chose First Fill X American oak, and it wasn't quite there. So that's when we went back and we got the second bottle, and the second set of casks, sorry.
So 3 years in first fill, and then
we
refilled it.
We refilled into another set of First Fill X bourbon, and
with 2 years.
Here we were expecting, or not expecting, how long do we have to go? So we started off every 3 months looking at it, and after 2 years we decided we have now got the flavor profile, which was my eureka moment idea right from the start. So I think if we nose this one, we find it gets a little bit deeper, a little bit more warm. The fruit is still there.
Okay, this one would, for me, is now classified as intense.
Okay.
I would say intense sweetness with a lot of fruit. Not quite sure yet what. You still get the banana I had from that one, but more intense.
When you take a sip of this, just hold it in your mouth for a few seconds. And just see how incredibly soft and smooth and how it develops on the palate, on the tongue, while it's in your mouth.
I would say it's I would say one of the flavors is now it's a little bit creamy. All the other ones have been, I would say, round and nice. This one is now, you have a lot of flavor packed in there now. But it's a little bit creamy when you have it, and you just told me you float around in your mouth. It's creamy with that banana coming through. So it's a rather pleasant, nice, I would say everyday dram, where you can just pour yourself a dram and you have a nice, relatively intense for an everyday dram, fruitiness, tropical fruitiness, bananas. I would have expected more of the oak coming through. The oak is definitely there. It definitely feels like a whiskey, but I would compare it to the other one. The oak is not getting that much stronger.
Which, to be honest, is what I was not looking for, because oak you can get in other forms, be it French oak, which is a little bit more bitter and comes through. American oak generally gives you the softer vanillins, the sweetness. And what I found in this one, as it's matured, the oak has tended to take kind of a back seat and allow the flavors of the whiskey to kind of interact with you rather than being a straightforward wood. There's more to it than just a spirit which has been matured in a cask, which has given you now a wood characteristic. Yeah,
I would say it just has enough wood to for everybody to feel, okay, that's a whiskey.
Yeah,
I think that's the point. You did go just beyond that point to say, okay, there's a good amount of oak in there, but yeah, you definitely feel it's American oak. It's one of the oak is not. There's no amount of bitterness in there. I would classify it like that. No bitterness.
No.
The total absence of bitterness.
Oops.
Lucky. Didn't spill anything. I like it.
So Bains itself is now, this year, July, the month we're in, it has now been 10 years on the market. I actually got a little message came up on my Facebook page this morning. It was 4 years to the day that we launched and sold our first bottle in the United States. Since then, we've come to Europe, predominantly into Germany and to the UK, with, I'm sure, our marketing department looking to branch out into Europe as the foothold expands in these particular countries where we already are.
Second sip it's building up.
Yeah.
Now it's got a bit of a toasted flavor. Toast and what is that? Also a lot of bananas and a lot of tropical fruit in there. I like it. Well, it's how much ABV do we have? Is that
it's
40
a straight 40% ABV?
40%. Yeah, I would say so. It's a lovely everyday drink that you can just enjoy on the way. So you're just having a break from a little task we're doing here, because there is a sales pitch going on for all of our German customers, that we have you signing bottles. And so if you want to have one of these bottles, just be quick, go to Whisky.de and find the Bains whiskey, and the first, how many bottles are you going to sign?
I think I'm doing
100 something.
20 bottles for you, is it?
120.
20 cases. 20 cases.
20 cases, 120.
Yeah,
120. So the first 120 that buy the Bains whiskey are going to get a signed bottle for you. So yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. So anything else that you might like to add? Is it possible to visit the James Sedgwick distillery?
Yeah, it is. If you're ever in the Cape, the distillery is open on Fridays and Saturdays. There are 2 tours, one at 10 o'clock in the morning, one at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And you must book online through a company called Web Tickets. It's normally limited to 10 people per visit. It's very intimate. You get into the process, and it normally finishes with a tasting of the whiskies from the distillery, along with various different poikies of food. It's not a direct food whiskey pairing. It's more to say, here's the whiskies, they're the food, you play around and see which suits your palate. So it's quite a nice fun way to finish it off. It's around about a 2.5 hour experience, so you need to give yourself a little bit of time, but it's proven very popular, and I'm sure as we progress, it will open more and more days. But at the moment, because it's not manned full time, it is just Fridays and Saturdays.
So if you're ever in the area around Cape Town, then what was it? Web Tickets. Yeah. Web Tickets. Yeah. Then you'll find the Bain Distillery.
Yeah, and you would just search for Whisky Experience.
Whiskey Experience. Okay, and then you can have probably a lot of tourists coming through in Cape Town, right?
Well, yeah, Cape Town is a very big tourist.
And the
wineries as well, We are the only whiskey distillery, commercial whiskey distillery on the continent of Africa. That is 54 countries. Okay, and by commercial, what I mean is that you will find our whiskey in every bottle store, every shop throughout the country. There are 1 or 2 people who have now started making craft whiskey, along with obviously craft gin, which I think everybody around the world is trying. We've got 1 or 2 craft whiskey makers, but those are very much limited to the site where they're making the whiskey for. So commercially, the size we are doing, we are the only one on the continent of Africa.
Okay, so hopefully if I ever am in the region, I will surely drop by.
Absolutely.
That will be lovely. I want to see how it's going to be made. So yeah, so thank you very much for having us here.
Pleasure, Benedict. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.